Welcome back, listeners, to another fascinating episode of The Way of Hermes. I'm Jake, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Emily. Today, we're diving deep into a mysterious and crucial figure in Hermetic tradition, Agathos Daimon.
That's right, Jake. Agathos Daimon is a name that might not be familiar to many, but his role in Hermetic texts is truly intriguing. We're going to explore who he was and his relationship to Hermes Trismegistus.
Absolutely, Emily. Let's start with the basics. Agathos Daimon, which translates to the Good Daemon in Greek, was revered in ancient Egypt and later syncretized with various deities. But what makes him particularly interesting in the context of Hermeticism?
Well, Jake, in many Hermetic texts, Agathos Daimon is portrayed as a wise teacher, often associated with Hermes Trismegistus. In fact, some sources suggest he might have been Hermes' father or spiritual guide, or perhaps both.
That's fascinating, Emily. It seems like there's a lot of complexity surrounding his identity. I've heard he's sometimes depicted as a snake god. Can you tell us more about that aspect?
Certainly, Jake. In both Egyptian and Greek traditions, snakes were indeed a common symbol associated with Agathos Daimon. He's often linked to Kamaphis or Kameph, a primordial serpent god in Theban cosmology. Some scholars even suggest he might be the originator of the Ouroboros symbolism.
The Ouroboros? That's the snake eating its own tail, right? A symbol of eternity and the cyclical nature of the universe?
Exactly, Jake. It's a powerful symbol in many esoteric traditions. But let's get back to Agathos Daimon's relationship with Hermes. There's an interesting genealogy proposed by some scholars that places Agathos Daimon as the father of Hermes Trismegistus.
Oh, tell us more about that, Emily. How did scholars come to this conclusion?
Well, it's based on a pseudonymous report cited by the Hermetic scholar Festugiere. According to this genealogy, there was an elder Hermes, possibly the god Thoth, who fathered Agathos Daimon. Agathos Daimon, in turn, was the father of the younger Hermes, called Trismegistus, who then fathered Tat.
That's quite a family tree, but you mentioned earlier that father could also mean spiritual guide. How does that fit into this picture?
In many ancient traditions, including Hermeticism, the terms father and son were often used to denote a spiritual relationship between teacher and student. So when we talk about Agathos Daimon being the father of Hermes, it could mean he was both his biological father and his spiritual guide.
I see. So, whether literal or metaphorical, there seems to be a strong case for Agathos Daimon being a crucial figure in Hermes Trismegistus' development. But what evidence do we have of Agathos Daimon as a teacher?
There are several references in Hermetic texts, Jake. For instance, in Corpus Hermeticum the 12th, Hermes speaks of Agathos Daimon as his spiritual master. He describes him in quite exalted terms, saying he truly beheld the all and spoke divine words.
Wow, that's high praise indeed. It sounds like Hermes held Agathos Daimon in great esteem.
Absolutely. In fact, some scholars suggest that Agathos Daimon might have been the very first human to be reborn divine and become the Ion, essentially the first to achieve the highest level of spiritual enlightenment in the Hermetic tradition.
That's a profound concept, Emily. It seems to position Agathos Daimon as a pivotal figure in the origins of Hermeticism. But I'm curious, how does this relate to the idea of a herald that we see in some Hermetic texts?
That's an excellent question, Jake. In some Hermetic texts, particularly in Corpus Hermeticum 1 and 4, there's mention of a mysterious herald or teacher who brings wisdom to mankind. While many scholars have assumed this figure to be Hermes Trismegistus, there's a compelling argument to be made that it might actually be Agathos Daimon.
Really? That's intriguing. What evidence supports this theory?
Well, in Corpus Hermeticum 4th, Hermes mentions a herald sent to mankind to teach about No and the way of immortality. Interestingly, he refers to this herald in the third person, which suggests he's not talking about himself. Given what we know about Agathos Daimon's role as a teacher, including to Hermes himself, it's possible that he could be this original herald.
That's a fascinating interpretation, Emily. It really reshapes how we might understand the origins of Hermetic wisdom. But I imagine there might be some objections to this theory. Are there any counter-arguments we should consider?
You're right to ask about counter-arguments, Jake. The main one comes from Corpus Hermeticum 13, where Hermes mentions that Poimandres transmitted mysteries to him. This, along with a statement by Michael Sellos in the 11th century CE, has led some to argue that Hermes was indeed the original herald.
I see. So it's not a completely settled matter. How do proponents of the Agathos Daimon theory respond to these points?
Well, they argue that being taught by Poimandres or Nu doesn't necessarily make one the divine herald. In fact, it's considered a normal part of becoming an enlightened Hermetic master. The key distinction is between being taught by Nu and being the original herald of Nu to mankind.
That's an interesting distinction. It seems like there's a lot of nuance to this debate. But let's shift gears a bit. You mentioned earlier that Agathos Daimon spoke about a level of consciousness beyond the divine Nu. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely, Jake. This concept comes from Hermetic fragments preserved in Christian treatises. In these, Agathos Daimon speaks of a noetic light prior to the noetic light and the nous of the luminous nous. It's a paradoxical description of something beyond even the divine Nu.
Wow, that's pretty mind-bending. What's the significance of this concept in Hermetic philosophy?
It's quite profound, Jake. This idea suggests a level of reality or consciousness that transcends even the highest conceptual understanding. Hermetic scholar Wouter Hanegraaff refers to it as something hypernoetic, beyond the nous itself.
That's fascinating, Emily. It really highlights the depth and complexity of Hermetic thought. But I'm curious, how does this relate back to Agathos Daimon's role as a teacher or potential herald?
Great question, Jake. This advanced teaching attributed to Agathos Daimon supports the idea that he was a figure of profound wisdom and insight. If he indeed had access to knowledge beyond even the divine Nu, it strengthens the argument for him being the original herald or teacher in the Hermetic tradition.
This is truly mind-expanding stuff, Emily. It seems Agathos Daimon's role in Hermetic tradition goes far beyond just being a teacher or father figure to Hermes. But I'm curious, how does this concept of Agathos Daimon as the original herald fit with the Egyptian roots of Hermeticism?
That's an excellent point, Jake. In Egyptian tradition, Agathos Daimon was often syncretized with She or Shai, the divinity of fate. He was also associated with Camaphis or Camaph, who was honored in Thebes as an unborn and immortal god. This connection to primordial divine wisdom aligns well with the idea of him being the first to receive and transmit Hermetic knowledge.
Fascinating. So there's a continuity between Egyptian religious concepts and Hermetic philosophy. But I'm wondering, how does this relate to the snake symbolism we mentioned earlier?
Great connection, Jake. The snake symbolism is particularly interesting when we consider Agathos Daimon's role as a teacher. In many cultures, snakes are associated with wisdom and knowledge. There's even a statue from the 1st century AD in the Allard Pierson Museum in Amsterdam that shows Thoth as a baboon with a snake on his head and an ibis at his feet.
That's a vivid image. What do you think it represents?
Some scholars interpret this statue as representing the genealogy of divine wisdom. The snake could represent Agathos Daimon, the baboon Thoth, and the ibis Hermes Trismegistus. It's a visual representation of the transmission of wisdom from Agathos Daimon through to Hermes.
That's a powerful symbol. It really emphasizes the idea of Agathos Daimon as the original source of Hermetic wisdom. But I'm curious, how does this fit with the concept of humans becoming gods in Hermetic philosophy?
That's a crucial point, Jake. In both Egyptian religion and Hermetic texts, there's this idea that humans can become gods, and some gods were once human. This concept is particularly relevant when we consider Agathos Daimon. Some scholars propose that he might have been a human who achieved divine status through his wisdom and spiritual attainment.
So in a way, Agathos Daimon could be seen as the prototype for the Hermetic path of spiritual evolution.
Exactly, Jake. If we consider Agathos Daimon as the first human to achieve divine status through Hermetic wisdom, he becomes not just a teacher, but a model for the entire Hermetic spiritual journey. This ties in beautifully with the idea of him being the original herald, the first to receive the divine vision, and then teach it to mankind.
This is truly fascinating, Emily. The idea of Agathos Daimon as both a divine figure and a model for human spiritual evolution is profound. But But I'm curious, how does this concept of the good daemon relate to the broader Hermetic worldview?
That's an excellent question, Jake. In Hermetic philosophy, the concept of the good daemon, or Agathos Daimon, is closely tied to the idea of personal transformation and the attainment of divine knowledge. It represents the highest potential within each individual, guiding them towards spiritual enlightenment.
So, in a sense, every practitioner of Hermeticism is striving to embody the qualities of Agathos Daimon.
Precisely, Jake. The journey of the Hermetic practitioner can be seen as an attempt to awaken and cultivate their own inner Agathos Daimon. This involves not just acquiring knowledge, but undergoing a profound inner transformation.
That's a powerful concept. It reminds me of the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below. Could we say that Agathos Daimon represents the above that we're trying to manifest below in our own lives?
That's a brilliant connection, Jake. Yes, Agathos Daimon can be seen as a divine archetype that Hermetic practitioners strive to embody. By aligning themselves with this good daemon, they aim to bridge the gap between the divine and human realms.
This really highlights the transformative nature of Hermetic philosophy. But I'm wondering, how does this relate to the practical aspects of Hermetic practice? Are there specific techniques or rituals associated with connecting to one's inner Agathos Daimon?
Many Hermetic practices involve meditation, contemplation, and visualization techniques aimed at awakening the divine spark within. Some practitioners work with invocations or prayers addressed to Agathos Daimon, seeking guidance and illumination.
That's fascinating. It seems like Agathos Daimon is not just a historical or mythological figure, but a living presence in contemporary Hermetic practice.
Absolutely, Jake. For many modern Hermeticists, Agathos Daimon is a vital part of their spiritual work. Some even describe experiences of direct communication or inspiration from this divine presence.
Wow, that really brings the ancient teachings to life in a tangible way. But I'm curious, how does this concept of Agathos Daimon relate to other spiritual traditions? Are there similar ideas in other philosophies or religions?
That's a great question, Jake. The concept of a divine guide or higher self is found in many spiritual traditions. In Gnosticism, for example, there's the idea of the divine spark within each person. In some forms of Buddhism, we find the concept Buddha nature. Even in modern psychology, Carl Jung's idea of the self bears some similarities.
It's amazing to see these connections across different traditions. It really speaks to the universality of the human spiritual experience. But bringing it back to Hermeticism, how does the concept of Agathos Daimon influence the way practitioners view their relationship with the divine?
In Hermeticism, the relationship with the divine is seen as deeply personal and direct. Agathos Daimon represents the possibility of intimate communion with the divine. It suggests that the path to spiritual enlightenment is not just about external worship, but about inner transformation and the realization of one's divine nature.
Emily, this concept of Agathos Daimon as a personal guide to divine wisdom is truly fascinating. But I'm curious, how does this idea manifest in the actual Hermetic texts? Are there specific passages that describe Agathos Daimon's teachings?
Absolutely, Jake. One of the most intriguing references comes from Corpus Hermeticum the 12th, where Hermes himself speaks about Agathos Daimon. He says, "Let me tell you what I have always heard Agathos Daimon say. If he had set this forth in writing, he would have greatly helped the race of men, for he alone, my son, as the firstborn god, looking down upon all things, truly spoke divine words."
That's a powerful statement. It seems to suggest that Agathos Daimon's teachings were primarily oral. Is there a reason why his wisdom wasn't written down?
That's an astute observation, Jake. The oral nature of Agathos Daimon's teachings adds to his mystique. It's possible that the highest wisdom was considered too sacred or complex to be captured in writing. This oral tradition might also explain why there's some ambiguity about his exact role and teachings in the Hermetic corpus.
Interesting. So, in a way, this oral tradition might have contributed to the various interpretations of Agathos Daimon's identity that we discussed earlier. But I'm curious, are there any other texts that give us insights into his teachings?
Yes, there are. In some fragments preserved in Christian treatises, Agathos Daimon is quoted discussing profound metaphysical concepts. For instance, he speaks of a holy fountain that is the source of all spirits and life. He describes it as one single noetic light prior to the noetic light, a concept that pushes the boundaries of human understanding.
Wow, that's some deep philosophical territory. It reminds me of the concept of the one in Neoplatonism. Do you think there might be a connection there?
That's an excellent parallel, Jake. There are indeed similarities between Agathos Daimon's teachings and Neoplatonic philosophy. Both deal with the idea of an ultimate, ineffable source of all existence. This connection highlights the complex interplay between various philosophical and spiritual traditions in the ancient world.
It's fascinating to see these interconnections. But bringing it back to Hermeticism specifically, how do these profound teachings of Agathos Daimon relate to the practical aspects of Hermetic practice?
Well, Jake, these teachings form the theoretical foundation for Hermetic practice. The idea of an ultimate divine source beyond even the realm of new or divine intellect informs the Hermetic quest for spiritual ascent. Practitioners aim to align themselves with this highest reality, often through meditation, contemplation, and various theurgic practices.
So in essence, the teachings of Agathos Daimon provide a roadmap for the Hermetic spiritual journey.
Agathos Daimon's wisdom serves as a guide seeking to transcend the limitations of ordinary consciousness and connect with the divine. His teachings suggest that this connection is not just possible, but is in fact the ultimate goal of human existence.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Hermetic Dialogues, the official podcast of the Way of Hermes website. If you are interested in free articles on Hermeticism and related topics or want to study this ancient tradition through our online course, be sure to visit our website at wayofhermes.com.